The controversial trial and execution of Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn's trial and execution wasn't just a simple case of royal justice gone wrong. It was something far more sinister and calculated than most people realize. The public saw a disgraced queen facing her fate with dignity. They witnessed what appeared to be proper legal proceedings with judges and juries. But behind all that surface-level understanding was something full of fabricated evidence, family betrayal, and psychological manipulation on a scale that would shock modern observers. This wasn't how justice worked even by 16th century standards. Imagine powerful ministers torturing confessions from innocent musicians. Picture a queen's own uncle presiding over her death sentence. Think about a king micromanaging his wife's beheading down to the smallest details while planning his next wedding. Yet this was exactly what happened in 1536, when England's most ruthless political machine decided Anne Boleyn had to die. In this video, we'll show you 5 of the weirdest and most shocking things about Anne Boleyn's trial and execution, and the last one, you won't believe it. Thomas Cromwell didn't just stumble into destroying Anne Boleyn. He methodically engineered her downfall with the precision of a master strategist. When Anne miscarried her male child in January 1536, Henry declared he had been seduced into marriage by sortileges, meaning deception or spells. Jane Seymour was quickly moved into royal quarters, but Cromwell saw opportunity where others saw tragedy. In April 1536, Cromwell vanished from court for a full week. Officials believed he was bedridden with grief after disappointing the king about foreign policy. Wrong. The man was plotting at his Stepney residence, constructing the legal framework to destroy England's queen. Cromwell had risen from blacksmith's son to Europe's most feared minister by understanding one brutal truth. Survival meant striking first. Anne had become his greatest threat. She wanted monastery revenues spent on education while he needed them for the royal treasury. She favored the French alliance while he preferred peace with the Holy Roman Empire. Worst of all, she had publicly threatened his life, saying she would like to see his head removed. Those weren't idle courtly words. In Tudor England, such statements often preceded actual executions, so Cromwell planted spies in Anne's household. He interrogated her servants about innocent conversations. He twisted harmless courtly flirtations into evidence of adultery and treason. The irony cuts deep. Anne had elevated Cromwell during her rise to power. She had protected him from enemies and supported his evangelical reforms. Now, her former protector was systematically destroying her, using the same ruthless methods she had once applauded against their mutual opponents. Mark Smeaton, a low-born court musician, became the foundation of Cromwell's fabricated case. In late April, Cromwell invited the naive young man to his Stepney house under friendly pretenses. What happened next reveals the depths of Tudor judicial corruption. Contemporary accounts describe torture involving knotted ropes tied around Smeaton's neck and progressively tightened until he confessed to adultery with the Queen. The agony would have been excruciating. Ropes cutting off air, digging into flesh, bringing him to the edge of death by suffocation. Smeaton finally agreed to say whatever Cromwell demanded. But confession wasn't enough. Under continued torture, he provided names of other alleged lovers. Henry Norris, the king's closest friend; William Brereton, a privy chamber gentleman; Sir Francis Weston, another courtier. Most damaging of all, George Boleyn, Anne's own brother, supposedly engaged in incest with the Queen. The evidence was laughably fabricated. Court records prove Anne wasn't even in the same locations as her supposed lovers on the dates specified in the indictments. On May 13th, when she allegedly committed adultery with Smeaton at Greenwich, she was actually documented at Richmond Palace. On two separate occasions, when she supposedly had intimate relations with Brereton, she was somewhere else entirely. Cromwell's victim selection revealed pure political calculation. Brereton had no significant personal connection to Anne. However, he had been blocking Cromwell's religious reforms in North Wales. His execution served Cromwell's broader agenda of removing policy obstacles. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cynical precision. This wasn't justice seeking truth. This was political assassination disguised as legal procedure. Anne's trial on May 15, 1536, featured a level of family betrayal that shocks even by Tudor standards. Among the 27 peers deciding her fate sat her own uncle, Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk, presiding as Lord High Steward. This man had celebrated Anne's queenship and profited enormously from Howard family influence. Now, he was literally overseeing his niece's judicial murder. Even more devastating was Henry Percy, 6th Earl of Northumberland, sitting in judgment of his former romantic interest. Percy had been betrothed to Anne years earlier, before Cardinal Wolsey and her father broke up their relationship. When the guilty verdict was announced, Percy collapsed and had to be carried from the courtroom. He died 8 months later, apparently destroyed by what he had participated in. But the ultimate family betrayal came from Anne's father himself. Thomas Boleyn, Earl of Wiltshire, was actually appointed to the secret commission investigating his own daughter's supposed crimes. Cromwell made him help gather evidence for Anne's execution, a father building the case for his child's death. The financial and political pressures were immense, but his participation remains one of the most chilling aspects of the entire conspiracy. Why would family members condemn their own blood? Because Tudor survival often required sacrificing relatives to save yourself. The Boleyn family's meteoric rise had created numerous enemies hungry for revenge. By participating in Anne's destruction, Thomas Boleyn hoped to demonstrate royal loyalty and preserve what remained of his position. Self-preservation trumped family bonds in Henry's England. George Boleyn defended himself with remarkable eloquence, dismantling charges through logical argument and exposing the lack of credible evidence. His performance was so impressive that observers thought he might actually win acquittal. But the outcome had been predetermined. Both Anne and George received unanimous guilty verdicts from a jury of their supposed peers, condemning them for crimes that almost certainly never occurred. Henry VIII didn't simply order Anne's death. He orchestrated every detail of her execution with the obsessive control of a theatrical director. Recent archival discoveries reveal Henry's micromanagement extended far beyond what historians previously understood. He dictated the method, location, timing, and witness list for his wife's final moments. Henry chose sword over axe for Anne's beheading. This wasn't mercy. It was calculated demonstration of his absolute power over her fate. The king imported a skilled French swordsman from Saint-Omer specifically for Anne's execution. This executioner had to be summoned well before the trial concluded, proving Henry had decided on her death regardless of any evidence presented in court. The private execution on Tower Green, rather than public sites, served multiple strategic purposes. It limited witnesses who could write sympathetic accounts. It allowed complete narrative control over her final moments. Most importantly, it demonstrated that even in death, Anne remained utterly subject to Henry's will. Henry deliberately delayed the execution by 1 full day, ostensibly because the French executioner arrived late. but evidence suggests intentional psychological torture. Anne spent an additional night, knowing each dawn might bring death. The mental cruelty served Henry's need to feel powerful in a situation where his masculinity had been publicly questioned by her supposed infidelity. On execution morning, foreign observers were specifically banned from the Tower. Cromwell issued orders clearing all strangers to prevent sympathetic accounts being written and distributed internationally. Henry wanted absolute control over how history would remember this moment. Taking command of execution minutiae helped Henry feel empowered rather than victimized by circumstances. As one historian explains, managing how his wife was disposed of convinced the king he controlled the situation instead of being controlled by it. This elaborate performance was designed to restore Henry's damaged ego and demonstrate his life and death authority over England. The most unbelievable revelation was Henry's breakneck speed from Anne's execution to his next marriage. Just 11 days separated Anne Boleyn's beheading from Henry's wedding to Jane Seymour. This timeline exposes the calculated nature of Anne's destruction and proves the entire affair was about replacement, not punishment for adultery. Henry became betrothed to Jane Seymour on May 20th, the day after Anne's execution. They married May 30th, 1536 in the Queen's Closet at Whitehall Palace. The venue itself was symbolic. Henry wed his third wife in rooms he had renovated with his second wife during their happier years. This wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate erasure of Anne's memory. Jane had been positioned for this outcome months in advance. In March 1536, before Anne's arrest, Jane was moved into Greenwich Palace royal apartments. Her brother Edward and his wife received lodgings connected to the king's chambers through private passages. The entire Seymour family was installed at court, while Anne still reigned as queen. While Anne awaited execution in the Tower, Jane Seymour was being splendidly served by royal cooks and richly dressed for her upcoming wedding. Sir Nicholas Carew, one of Anne's enemies, hosted Jane at his Surrey estate during the transition. The contrast between Anne's imprisonment and Jane's luxury reveals the orchestrated nature of the entire scheme. Even Henry's supporters found the 11-day gap disturbing. Contemporary records show the rapid transition sounded ill in the ears of his people. But Henry was determined to move forward regardless of public opinion or moral concerns. His primary motivation was never Anne's supposed adultery. His real concern was securing legitimate male heirs to continue Tudor dynasty. Anne had suffered multiple miscarriages, and her January 1536 pregnancy ended in losing a male child. Henry interpreted this as divine punishment for their marriage. Jane Seymour represented fresh hope for sons who could secure the succession. Political calculations were equally crucial. European monarchs were watching to see how Henry handled his domestic crisis. Rapid remarriage demonstrated continued stability and uninterrupted diplomatic relationships. Anne Boleyn's trial and execution didn't happen by accident. It occurred through meticulously orchestrated political manipulation designed to eliminate an inconvenient queen and enable Henry's desperate search for male heirs. The situation wasn't what people assume it was. It was something far more calculated and ruthless than romantic betrayal gone wrong. Thomas Cromwell engineered Anne's downfall, not from moral outrage about adultery, but from cold recognition that his political survival depended on removing her influence over the king. Henry micromanaged her death, not from broken-hearted fury, but from psychological need to demonstrate absolute royal authority. The charges of adultery, incest, and treason were simply convenient legal mechanisms for achieving a predetermined outcome. The deeper motivation reveals the brutal reality of Tudor marriage politics. Royal unions were never about love or companionship, but about producing legitimate male heirs who could continue dynastic rule. When Anne failed to deliver the sons Henry desperately needed, she became expendable regardless of innocence or guilt. Normal expectations of justice, loyalty, and legal fairness were never the actual purpose of their relationship. The real purpose was maintaining Tudor power at any cost through successful reproduction. Anne Boleyn may not have been what people expected by today's standards of due process and marital fidelity, but she was something else entirely by the merciless logic of 16th century dynastic politics. The people involved didn't just survive the upheaval of her destruction. They mastered the art of ruthless calculation in their pursuit of political survival. In the end, their true legacy was not in what appeared on the surface as tragic romance destroyed by infidelity. It was in the lasting impact of demonstrating that absolute monarchy meant exactly that. For Anne Boleyn and her destroyed reputation, that lasting impact was everything.